We will have one presentation today by Erika Mancha with the Texas Water Development Board. Erika currently manages the Innovative Water Technologies Group at the Texas Water Development Board, the agency that she joined in 2013. Her focus is water reuse and desalination. She received her BS in engineering from Smith College in Massachusetts and an MS in civil engineering from the University of Texas at El Paso. She also worked for approximately 4 years in land development for private consulting firms. Okay, Erika, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you and good afternoon. Thank you for joining the webinar and for having me. Today I'll provide, as Cassie mentioned, a quick overview on water reuse data, projects, and research studies in Texas. We'll first go ahead and start off and just kind of give you a little background on what the Texas Water Development Board does. The Texas Water Development Board was created as a legislative response in 1957 with a $200 million grant after the worst drought on record in Texas occurred from 1954 to 1956. The TWD is primarily responsible for water planning and administrating water funds for the state. This includes the development of a state water plan, the administration of various finance programs, and the collection of water resource data. The diagram here on the left shows the 5 major divisions that we have at the agency: finance, water science conservation, water supply and infrastructure, operations and administration, and the Texas Natural Resource Information System. Please note that within each division there are different groups and departments, and the Innovative Water Technologies department that I manage is under our science arm, which is our Water and Science Conservation division. A little bit more about the Innovative Water Technologies Department. We were created in 2005 to advance the development of alternative water supplies. Here on the diagram it shows the 4 program areas that we cover: aquifer storage and recovery, water reuse, desalination, and brackish resources aquifer characterization system. And our goal really is to kind of provide information to advance and promote the development and abuse of alternative water supplies in Texas through either presentations, managing research projects, or just kind of being engaged with stakeholders. A little bit about our regional water planning process. Texas is divided into 16 regional water planning areas lettered from A to P. The planning process starts with input at the region level, and every 5 years, plans from the 16 regional water planning areas are compiled into the state water plan. We are currently in the 2017 state water plan, and the regional planning groups are currently actually working already on their plans for the 2022 state water plan. This is just a kind of a historical fact. State water planning was not always a bottom-up approach. The first 6 plans that were prepared by the agency were top-down, and then the last 4 recent plans have been a bottom-up approach. Now, just this will be a high-level overview of our planning process, but just a few kind of basics. The board develops draft population and water demand projections, and the regional water planning groups review and provide input on those. Then the board then adopts these projections for use in developing the plan, and this is kind of a key step in the process. And to kind of do that, then the regional water planning groups determine the source availability and the existing supplies for the entities in their planning areas. We then actually compare both of those things, and we identify either if there's surpluses or if there's needs, which is, we also like a shortage. When we identify there are needs, the regional water planning groups identify, evaluate, and recommend water management strategies and projects. The difference between a strategy and a project is a strategy will kind of it's a strategy to provide water, but then the project is the actual infrastructure to provide that water to the different groups, the regional water planning groups. So here, this slide shows, the pie chart shows where that new water might come from. So, we identified there's all these needs, and then we've identified water management strategies of where that water can come from. And reuse will account in total for about 13% of all that new water by 2070, and that's approximately 1.1 million acre feet. That's 1% is coming from direct potable reuse. You have 7.6% coming from indirect reuse. And then you have the rest of 4.4% coming from other direct reuse. Now, to look at this more kind of geographically, there are 15 regional water planning groups that have reuse as a recommended water management strategy. So we're kind of tying it back to that original map I had mentioned. And there's one that doesn't have reuse, and that's the Panhandle region, Region A, shown with the red X mark. And then there's the 6 regions that have direct potable reuse as a strategy, and you'll see them denoted with a droplet. Then you have 10 regions showing that they'll have some type of other direct reuse, which is non-potable. And then you have 8 regions that have indirect reuse strategy denoted with the green triangle, and these can be either potable or non-potable uses. So we're kind of started to, I mentioned a few different terms on reuse. So what is reuse? So, there are 2 types of reuse. You have indirect and direct reuse. Indirect reuse, which is the one on the left side on the chart, water enters an environmental buffer such as a reservoir, river, lake, and then you actually, it enters, and then you might then take it out to use it for a beneficial use. On the right side, you have direct reuse, where water does not enter a water body prior to use. The chart kind of shows some examples of where water can be used for that, for direct reuse. So you could use it for golf course irrigation, residential use, industrial reuse for like cooling towers, and just kind of other irrigation uses as parks, athletic fields. And so those are the main 2 types of water use, indirect and direct reuse. But then you also have the most recent you have another component to add. You could have potable and unpotable reuse. And here this kind of talks a little bit more about recently potable reuse has become a more viable option. And so here kind of explains a few terms related to potable reuse. There is de facto reuse, which is kind of a more unplanned planned reuse where the drinking water supply just contains a significant fraction of treated wastewater. An example of that is the Trinity River, where wastewater discharges from the Dallas Metroplex area and downstream in the city of Houston. Then you have indirect potable reuse, where you kind of see here, on the right with the diagrams, you see that you take treated wastewater, and it may receive some treatment up to advanced treatment, or it can receive less than advanced treatment, but then it's discharged to the environmental buffer, and then it's diverted to the conventional drinking water treatment plant, and then kind of back to the consumer. And then the last diagram shows the direct potable reuse, where you take the treated wastewater from the wastewater treatment plant, and then you take it through advanced water treatment, and then it could either go directly to the distribution system, the public water distribution system, or it could actually go up front to the water source for the conventional water treatment plant as shown in the diagram. Here, this kind of timeline shows the application of reuse and kind of just gives you a little history. The application of reuse starts back in the late 1880s using crop irrigation. Then it was kind of applied in an industrial setting for cooling towers. Then you're able to kind of see that it moved on to municipal for non-potable purposes, so for parks, golf courses. The River Rock in San Antonio is filled with reclaimed water. And then you kind of see this, deep direct potable reuse. And this is kind of the time where, you start seeing kind of the initial plannings for the Big Spring, the facility, the direct potable reuse facility in the Big Spring area. And so this kind of gives you a timeline of some of the applications. Now here's another little timeline that kind of shows more for regulations at the state level. So the first regulations were adopted in the 1990s, and then regulations for non-potable direct reuse were established in 1997. Now, for some of the most recent projects related to direct potable reuse, those projects are kind of permitted on a project-by-project basis by TCEQ. So there's no set regulations on those projects. At the national level, the EPA only has guidelines. There are no national regulations on reuse. The guidelines, so here shows the first guidelines that kind of were, they kind of came out in 1980, and then they were updated in 92 and 2004. But the most recent guidelines were the ones in 2012, the 2012 guidelines for water reuse to serve as a reference on water reuse practices. But then because there was this interest in pursuing potable water reuse, the EPA recently kind of issued this 2017 Potable Reuse Compendum to outline key science, technical, and policy considerations regarding potable reuse. So here are the two kind of main guideline resources that are available at the national level. And just generally, different states throughout the U.S. have been coming up with their own guidelines. They've either had technical advisory committees and put together, and then they kind of draft up some of their own guidelines. And I will later talk about some of the guidelines Texas has put together. Here is a map just kind of showing indirect and just direct potable reuse projects that kind of been, I've been aware of. So we have the raw water production facility in Big Spring, Texas. They began operating in May 2013, and they became the first direct potable water reuse facility in Texas and in the nation, and it's still operating. They produce about 2.5 million gallons per day of potable water. Then you also have the direct potable reuse project in Wichita Falls. They began operation in July 2014, but this was an actual emergency project and was later decommissioned in July 2015. They actually went on to permit their project. Their long-term goal was really an indirect potable reuse project, and so they actually have gone online with augmenting their Lake Arrowhead water supply, and that project went online in January, or kind of January, February of 2018, so about a year, a little bit over a year ago. You do have the Advanced Purified Water Treatment Plan in El Paso. They, put a technical advisory committee. They then actually conducted pilot testing for their project. And this project is what's, I guess, different from the other projects is that this project will actually take after advanced water treatment, the water will go directly to the distribution system. And the other projects currently don't do that. They actually take it up front to the water source or the water supply source for the conventional water treatment plant. So this is what makes El Paso unique in that project. And they're currently in the engineering design phase. You also have, at some point there was a project proposed in Brownwood, and they actually, that project kind of stalled because they were waiting for city council approval for a long time. They actually obtained a permit from TCEQ and a loan from the Texas Water Development Board, but the project just didn't move on. You have some indirect reuse projects. You have some of the wetlands up in the North Dallas area. You have the Tarrant Regional Water District and the North Texas Municipal Water District that manage those wetlands up there as indirect potable reuse project. Then you also have, like I mentioned, the Wichita Falls project that implemented their Lake Arrowhead indirect potable reuse project, and that went online February 2018. And then you have other people that have also kind of just conducted feasibility studies and looked into direct potable reuse, and you have, or just reuse in general. You have Laguna Madre District, and then you also have San Angelo. And San Angelo has actually completed a feasibility study and pilot for direct potable reuse, and looks like they might be actually moving to a next step on that project as well. And so, through our program, we've completed several reuse research projects in our water reuse program in the Innovative Water Technologies Department. And one of the first projects that we completed was in 2011. Allen and Plum and Associates did a three-part report. 3 different separate reports actually, and each one covered a different topic. The first one was the history of water reuse in Texas. The technology, the second report here in the middle showing is the state of technology of water reuse. And then the final report kind of put research areas, topics, and areas needed to advance water reuse in Texas. And so you'll see a list of different research priorities for us to pursue. And so kind of this is the beginning of our program that our reuse program kind of started in 2009. So this was our first follow-up project. One of the other projects, more recent projects, was we evaluated with the interest in direct potable reuse. We funded a project that kind of looked at putting together a report of just kind of like providing a resource document for any entities or communities that wanted or were interested in learning about implementation of direct potable reuse. And this document has been, is available now, and it's very comprehensive. It talks about all these kind of different components listed here on the slide about, contaminants of concern, what should you be looking for when you characterize your water, any things you need to do for source control, treatment technologies. It provides a small regulatory summary on some of the steps you need to take, what kind of outreach they suggest you perform. So it really kind of covers all the aspects of planning for a direct potable reuse project. And that's available, all these reports the reports I mentioned before, and then the reports this one and the ones I'll mention later, are all available online for the public to use. the other project that we recently funded was we conducted water quality testing and monitoring at the raw water production facility in Big Spring, Texas. The testing pretty much we were doing quarterly sampling for chemicals of emergence concern and microbial pathogens, and then we also kind of put a guidance document together for monitoring at a direct potable reuse facility. So this diagram here kind of shows the treatment train for the water production facility at Big Springs, and we pretty much sampled before and after each treatment unit to make sure what we were trying to see was the treatment was effective, and we wanted to determine the type of contaminants found in the water, and then, like I mentioned, the results were all compiled in a guidance document or a research document to help communities kind of monitor DPR facilities. This diagram or this map here kind of shows here that like you have the location of the raw water production facility in reference to where it disposes of their concentrate to the city wastewater treatment. So the raw water production facility, what's nice about it is it's located really close to the wastewater treatment plant. And then what's also nice is they have Bales Creek kind of in their backyard. So when they have to deal with the discharging the concentrate from their reverse osmosis system, they just have to kind of discharge it to a very saline creek. And so they don't have to deal with extra steps for disposal or higher costs associated to that. And so that's kind of the diagram just kind of shows the overall flow, the overall placement and locations of the treatment plant and the wastewater treatment plant. And finally, just the results of the study pretty much the contaminants they predominantly found in the water were, I think, the higher amounts were like sugar, sucralose, and then they also found caffeine, which are normal day-to-day things that we as humans, digest with either food or drinks. But they also, when they sampled, as I mentioned, they sampled before and after each treatment train, but they also sampled at the Moss Creek Reservoir. And pretty much the water coming out of the advanced water treatment plant is actually, superior, better quality than what's in the Moss Reservoir. And so by us discharging that water to the Moss Creek Reservoir, we're actually improving the quality of the water in the reservoir. And but yeah, they didn't they didn't find anything of concern. And one of the things to keep in mind when people start talking about sampling for direct potable reuse projects, the units of the quantities, we start kind of getting into really really small units. So to be able to kind of put them in perspective, we have to kind of think about them, bigger picture. Some of these things you have to kind of drink a whole swimming pool before it actually kind of affects you. And so you start thinking, we say there was caffeine, but what was the amount? And it could be pretty small in terms of units. If anyone has any questions just overall on reuse and what was discussed, this kind of concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions about our programs or anything I presented.
Erika, thank you so much. We really appreciate the presentation. And now we will also open it up to answer any questions. So please feel free to type any to the audience. Please feel free to type any questions you may have into the chat box. Okay, we have a question that says, where can we find the report from the study on Big Spring RO plant discharge?
You could go to our Texas Water Development Board website, and here, as I show on that last slide, if you go under the Innovative Water Technologies Program, you'll see it under the Reuse Program projects. And, you know, once you click on the link for that project, you'll see all the deliverables there available, both the report and any appendix associated, because any of the, for example, the appendix would have all the water quality sampling that was conducted, and the results will actually be in the appendix.
Great, thank you, Erika. And the next question is, what cities currently have direct potable reuse?
So the only city that we have direct potable reuse right now operating is the Big Spring facility, which is the raw water production facility. So the only one we have in Texas is Big Spring. The rest of the other projects are indirect potable reuse. We do have indirect potable reuse projects, and we have, like I mentioned, we have Wichita Falls online. We have the Abilene project, the Phantom Hill Reservoir project. We do have the 2 wetland projects up in the Metroplex area. And so we do have more indirect potable reuse projects. And I forgot to mention El Paso, you know, has that direct potable. In the future, they're working on their direct potable reuse projects where they're actually in the engineering design phase. But they also have what they call an aquifer recharge project, and they actually are recharging, you know, treated reclaimed water through infiltration basins. So they also have an indirect potable reuse project.
Excellent. Okay, next question is, are there any studies underway on extreme climate, drought/flooding on these reuse systems over time?
Not that I'm aware of. The agency recently legislation just finished, and there will be some major changes occurring within related to flood, because we will be creating a whole new flood division within the science arm, and we'll be creating a whole flood planning division, because the Texas legislature just directed us as an agency to prepare, similarly like the state water plan, but prepare a flood plan. And so implementation of all these kind of things that have passed, related to flood are in the works. In the future, there might be, but as I know of, not that I know of.
Okay, great. Well, that concludes the questions that we have so far. If